Hello, and welcome back to another chapter of Heroes and Hermits by Algonator on AO3. Chapter 9. Somehow a pack of wild goats would be a much quieter company than a single pissed-off Voidwalker. Never in their life did evil Exuma imagine becoming the admin, the big guy who would turn into such disaster. When their twin first left the world, they were calm, a bit hurt that they weren't warned about it, but calm. Then a shit ton of the other hermits left after them all at once. It was then that EX had started to panic, because as Hermitcraft was rapidly emptied of its registered members with admin rights, eventually the burden of it was left to EX, who was ecstatic at first, because it would have meant that Exuma finally trusted them enough to leave the entire server in their hands. However, they slowly came to realize what that actually meant. They were hesitant at first what to do with this newly discovered omnipotence. Should they bring down their lightning upon the land, or should they first force Worm-Man to visit them again? The possibilities were endless, truly mind-blowing. First minutes of their ultimate rule were filled with vicious laughter and cackling lightning in the sky. Then it all came crashing down on them. The server had finally connected to its new ruler, and with it came everything. EX fell on the floor of the evil Emporium as it all happened. They felt like they were physically torn in pieces from the stream of data piercing their mind. Helmet on their heads started to become unbearable. Their armor was too hot and too constricting on their skin. EX struggled to take off their helmet to grasp a few breaths of air. It was intoxicating and burned horribly at their lungs, but at least they could breathe. Waking up in their bed after what felt like a nightmare, EX was only reassured in its reality. After respawning, their throats still burned from the inside, but thankfully their helmet was back on. They could think more clearly now after a shock of the first minutes had passed. They didn't only command the server now, they were the head admin. Exuma? They whispered into the emptiness of the room, not really expecting an answer. Their sibling left the world, didn't they? So what did they expect to hear? If they focused hard enough, there was still a noticeable warmth in their connection. No matter where Exuma was right now, they were alive. Then, if they were alive, why was the server ownership transferred between the two of them? Unless it was voluntary, which EX knew deep inside it wasn't. This could only happen if the previous owner had perished. This too was impossible. The bond between the two parts was so strong. EX could always feel their twins present in the back of their consciousness. Nothing had changed. Exuma was alive, they were sure of it. What happened then? To find possible answers, they would need to know why their twin left. Why so many hermits left all at once? So as their initial confusion passed, EX directed their attention to a communicator on their right hand. Its screen was already opened on the main chat. That was filled with almost 100 messages of other people. Seemed like Exuma didn't warn anyone on the server about their sudden need to leave. And the best person to question right now would be Pearlescent Moon. Judging by her messages, she was the only one who saw what happened. EX knew little about her and never really cared enough to shove their nose into Hermit's business to learn more about any of them. All they knew about Hermits before this session came from short interactions and shared memories with Exuma from before their separation. When EX realized they had no clue where her base was, it was time to take advantage of their newly acquired authority. On command, one command, and they've been teleported to Pearl's coordinates. This method came with its own disadvantages, like getting kicked in the gut upon startling her. In reality, it didn't even tickle them, but EX still flinched on reflex and barely held off their surprised shout. Evil X, do you know what happened? She immediately switched from being surprised to being threatening. Well, as threatening as she could be at half their height. EX didn't know, actually, and had no interest in getting themselves blamed for that. I don't. That's why I came here, you idiot. They were standing on the roof of Pearl's base, and from what they could see, the scene of the incident. According to Pearl's frantic messages in chat, that was where the meeting took place, where everyone vanished. And EX could feel the evidence of it. Recently used powerful magic has left a trace in the local atmosphere. With their helmet on, they couldn't properly sense it. Maybe one of the hermits who remained on Hermitcraft might be helpful in this situation. They turned to look at Pearlescent Moon. She was nervously rubbing a strand of her hair in between fingers as she looked at EX. A second later, EX realized that they struggled to form a coherent question. Server data output was too loud and present in their mind. It was getting ridiculously hard to ignore the constant discomfort of it, like a scratch that refused to heal. At one moment, it became so unbearable they had to close their eyes and turn up their atmosphere filters in their helmet. It provided little help, but at least it was something. EX never felt anything similar, but they had memories of Exuma complaining about server lag distracting them for work. Was that what they were talking about? Then EX won't tolerate that crap. Focusing on the energy of the server, they could, in theory, find the source of their headache and deal with it. Before teleporting to deal with the lag, EX told Pearl to wait for them here. After that, they left. The first thing they saw after teleporting was a giant pile of potatoes. 5, maybe 6 times taller than them, reaching the ceiling of the room. It was a storage facility. EX could see an automatic storage sorter beyond the piles of potatoes. The one in front of them was the largest among them. The entire place was filled with millions upon millions of potatoes. Even looking down, EX could see their boots being covered in smashed soft goo from the squished vegetables. Oh my word! Sorry for the mess! A voice came from inside one of the smaller piles, from which a second later emerged Mumbo Jumbo. He was wearing a superhero knockoff costume that made EX cringe on the inside. Who would voluntarily wear something so tacky and stupid? This look already made them want to punch this hermit on the face. Stumbling through the mass of potatoes that covered the floor, Mumbo came closer to them, and while he was walking and struggling not to damage too many vegetables on his way, EX got a chance to check their communicator. It was still constantly buzzing as hermits all over the server were panicking. Strangely, the one they were visiting now appeared to be focused on something else. Mumbo's face showed slight discomfort and confusion, but he wasn't screaming at them about the other's disappearance. So, hi there, Evil X. I thought you were green for a moment when I saw someone red, but then I realized it was you. His voice was hurried and shaky. Because, green has wings and you were so tall, dude, but for a moment I totally mixed you up. Shut up already. Don't you know what's happening? Mumbo looked at them in question. EX noticed how his mustache moved with the rest of his face. Made it all the more punchable. Well, if it's about my potato delivery system, then I don't know why it's all spilling out. Hoppers seem to be fine, and my ice tracks are all sealed. These potatoes came out of... With fleeing patience, EX smacked their hand, intending on slapping the blabbering idiot on the face, but Mumbo dodged it at the last moment, and their hand landed on the wall to their left. It immediately stuck to the honey the wall was made out of. Hey, I thought you were playing nice this season, said Mumbo. Can't you be quiet for a moment? EX pulled their hand out, now covered with honey. It was dripping down from the hand on potatoes on the floor, creating a bigger mess. It's not about your dumb farm or whatever. Haven't you seen your friends disappearing? What? When? Who has disappeared? So you don't know. Where is your communicator? There were so many people I won't even bother counting. The main thing is that my clone was one of them. Exuma's gone? Well, I thought we were supposed to meet near Botum for a meeting. And I was late anyway. Oh, for goodness sake. Mumbo pat down his pockets on that stupid costume of his and took out his comm. It was silent, unlike EX's. That was probably why Mumbo had no idea of what was happening. Mumbo and Exuma are more alike than Exuma, with their own damn clone. Mumbo's clumsiness and derpy face expressions almost made Evil X smile when thinking of their twin. After disposing of the headache-inducing potatoes, Evil Exuma came back to Pearl with Mumbo by their side. Teleportation left the mustached man sick on the surface of the roof, while EX looked around in search of Pearl. They should have teleported to her instead of the last coordinates, but then they did want her to wait here and she left. It was her fault for disobeying her new admin. To her luck, EX managed to spot her standing on the opposite side of the Bodum Center, talking to two other people. One of them was Corrales. EX knew him as he was one of Exuma's closest friends. The name of the other man they didn't know. Most hermits they remembered only visually before this season, so that wasn't that weird. Names held no meaning to them when they were trying to destroy the server. EX grabbed Mumbo, who was still sick from sudden space displacement, and teleported again. They could have walked down to the others. They could have, but Mumbo's sad whimpering was too amusing to pass on. Aha! The man whose name Evil X couldn't remember turned to them with a scowl on his face. It was meant to be a smile, but his unhinged eyes made it look aggressive. EX wasn't intimidated so easily, not by some short creature. You! It was you who did it! Corrales grabbed his friend in a hug before he could foolishly jump on EX and get himself killed. I had nothing to do with it. I was at home when they disappeared, replied EX and crossed their hands. How dare this goblin man accuse them of doing evil? They were a good person now. And I'm the head admin now, anyway, so you have to listen to me, or I'll send you to the void. Oh, now you're so brave all of a sudden, huh? The man tried to jump at them again, but Corrales had a strong grip on him. Corrales muttered his name too. This was B-Dubs. Right, that was B-double-O, one of the NHO guys. No wonder he was so angry, thought EX, because they earlier saw Dark M's and Ethos names among those who have left. Their names EX had engraved inside as "Do not approach under any circumstances." If a threat of having to deal with Exuma's responsibilities wasn't enough, just the thought of having NHO coming after them in revenge would have motivated EX to act. B-Dubs was still going on with his threats. Look at all those long legs you have. Would be a shame if someone stole your knees. He twisted in Corrales' arms and stretched his leg, delivering a kick to Evil X's right knee. Their armor made a low metal sound, but otherwise EX stayed unaffected. You think you're so big and scary, huh? Wait until I crawl out and take your eyes for myself. Bubbles, calm down. Didn't Pearl say that they were trying to help? Let's listen. Despite his soft words, Corrales kept his grip tight. Using both physical force and manipulation, EX could get behind that tactic. Pearl, meanwhile, was comforting Mumbo, who was on the verge of puking. The way his mustache shook with his body in pained spasm made EX giggle. Corrales glared at him with an unamused face and shook his head. Slowly, and then as if to prove something, he relaxed his arms for a moment. B-Dubs lunged forward like a hungry dog, making EX flinch and step away. Somehow Corrales held him off anyways, and EX got the message. When Mumbo felt better and B-Dubs felt less murderous, they all sat down on the couple of benches Pearl brought out. There was a lot to discuss, like how these hermits should have more respect for their new leader. The headache from Mumbo's potatoes came back again, and EX had to quickly teleport back to his base and erase more potatoes that had spawned out of nowhere. There was a duplication glitch in there, EX was sure at this point, but they had no knowledge on how to fix it. Mumbo was no help as well because, by his own words, he had no intentions of creating infinite potatoes, and didn't know how it could have happened. Although he had experience with duping items and knew the mechanics of it, this time was by accident. When Evil X came back to the Hermits, there was more of them again. There was one of the new Hermits, a ginger woman who was some kind of forest creature, and a couple more familiar faces. Vintage Beef and Stress Monster. The two represented different groups of hermits in EX's mind. Beef was one of the members of the NHO, was most certainly in the avoid category. Despite their current alliance, and him being susceptible to mind control, EX was still wary of him. On the other hand, they respected Stress. Her style was immaculate in their opinion, and her base, while unfinished, was looking dark and epic. She was a wild one, unlike B-Dubs, and EX preferred to stay at a distance. It just so happened that they had to stand between Pearl and the new hermit for this distance. Why are we even here? Asked Beef. I mean, in Bodum. Wasn't this the place where people went missing? Yeah, I think we should go and hold this meeting at Spawn, said Pearl, and EX already could feel her looking up at them. Can you send us there? Ha! Like I trust this jerk not to kill us in the process! Exclaimed B-Dubs from where he was still being held by Corrales. Beef, who stood near the two, put his hand on his friend's shoulder in an effort to calm him down. EX hoped that more people wouldn't blame them for this incident because they were uncomfortable enough as it was. Everyone was looking at them like it was already decided that they were guilty. Even Corrales was suspicious of them. It was obvious from the way his eyes trailed EX's every move. He might be trying to uphold order and peace, but who knew for how long? The atmosphere was growing tenser with glares and quiet murmurs, and Evil X wasn't going to let some loudmouth call him a jerk. Why would I kill you, you idiot? If I wanted to, I would have done so long before you could start insulting me. I don't know. What have you done to Exuma and the others, then? Did you send them off-world so you could kill them? Beat-Ups finally freed himself from Corralis's weakened grip and walked right up to EX. His eyes were filled with fury, and it made EX want to punch him right in the face. "We can't just go accuse people, Beat-Ups." Stress's voice was loud, distracting Beat-Ups from his attempts to intimidate. "Poor EX, he must be terrified that their family is gone. Look at them. Do they look guilty to you?" Evil X would argue, but decided not to. Exuma might be like 3/4 of their impulse control, but they could keep themselves from self-sabotage. And Stress was right in something. They weren't guilty. They just needed a way to prove it to the others so they would accept EX as their new admin. The best way would be to bring everyone back, but with no way of contacting them or tracing where they went, it was a challenge. Evil X's knowledge of admin stuff was limited. They only paid attention to what Exuma was doing if it was something cool, like weather manipulation. They remember the basics of how to do some commands and access the code, and to their damn luck, almost everyone who could have helped them in this were gone. Almost. EX could think of at least 2 people who could be of use. Finding Wells Knight was a simple quest. They first asked Beef if he knew what the Knight was up to. Apparently, Hermits discussed it in chat, and Wells was currently guarding Hermitcraft's world border. How could one person guard an entire border? EX thought it was stupid. But then Exuma's wasn't here. Evil X knew nothing about borders. Maybe that was just how Hermitcraft worked. They found him thousands of blocks away. The blue shimmer of the world border was reflecting off of Wells Knight's armor as if he was glowing. When EX teleported to him, this light stunned them for a second until their helmet adjusted the filters on the visor. The sunlight was bright around them, so together with that stupid armor made their eyes water, even through filters. So EX spent a few minutes adjusting their visor to block the light more efficiently. While they did that, Wells Knight just stood there and watched them. Awkward. "Hello?" he said when EX stopped fumbling with the settings and looked at him. "Yeah, hi." They were quiet for a moment while EX struggled to pick their words. Talking to Wells felt weird. "Are you gonna just stand here all the time?" they finally asked. That wasn't very accurate to what they wanted to say, but hey, at least they said something. "Someone has to guard our home. Are you going to do that for me?" Hearing his voice was just as strange. Wells Knight had his guard on the helmet lowered, making his voice a bit echoey. EX thought that was what people felt like when they talked to them instead of Exuma. "Heck no, I have a server to rule, and a clone to get back. Plenty to do for my ass." "Not rule, EX. Take care of. That's your job, and I want you to get it clearly." Wells turned his head, and EX could finally see his eyes through the guard. You have no power over others if they don't accept you. Arrogance won't help you if you want to be a better person." "Arrogance? What, are you jealous of my self-confidence? I can take care of this stupid server, I can. And you can stand here and guard your stupid barriers. Not like I came here to ask if you knew how we could, I don't know, find where the others went." Wells Knight took off his helmet and turned to stare at Evil X right in the eyes, as if he knew. And it seemed like he knew because he continued to stare in silence. Until Evil X could not bear it any longer and covered their visor with a palm. When someone leaves the server, you can still track their data if you're their admin. I am not. As you put it yourself, I'm guarding my stupid barrier. And I can't leave the server because you are an incompetent child who can barely take care of themselves, let alone a full server. If you think you can do what your new role entails, then go and learn how to track their data. Wells rolled his shoulders, and then EX felt him touching their forearm. They lowered their arm but kept their gaze on the ground. I would have offered a search party, but with you in charge of the server, I doubt you wouldn't accidentally break something while letting more people in and out. And that's assuming that Exuma did properly open the server when they left, because if they didn't, there might be a giant hole in Hermit's defenses that we can't even close up. What do you mean? This barrier only protects us from things already on the server. There are others, like invisible barriers, that technically only exist in the code. They are what stands between us and the rest of the universe. Right? And you think that might be broken? Asked EX as calmly as they could. This new revelation just made this day worse. I have no way of knowing. There are only two ways we can find out. Wells pressed his hand into a fist and raised one finger. If you go and look in the code, he raised a second finger, and if we get invaded. You already missed that one, sweetie. They both turned around at the sound of a third voice. It startled Wells into taking out his sword in a flash of movement, and EX took a step back to avoid the tip of the blade slashing their knees. Oh, the void. This day was getting worse and worse by the minute. On the other side of the barrier stood Hell's Knight, grinning like he just won the lottery, swinging sword in one hand, holding his helmet in the other. Despite that, his voice was still echoey due to being on the wrong side of the server. Get lost, you vermin, said Wells Knight as he put his helmet back on, but opened his guard to better see his rifle. Can't you see we're busy here? Evil X chose to just wave at the knight on the opposite side, getting a wink and a nod in reply. I can see. That's why I'm here, to spitefully annoy you while you're at your most vulnerable. We aren't. My spirit is as strong as ever, and I won't let you run around here. So get back into that hellhole you crawled out of. Ow! And here I hope to get some attention. Hells leaned on the barrier and put the sword on the shoulder. Don't you want to fight? Or I might just sneak in and attack one of your friends. You know I will just throw you back out, so don't bother wasting my time. Why? It's my favorite activity! Evil X was fed up with their banter and stepped forward, standing between the two knights. They leaned on the barrier in the same spot as Hell's Knight and glared down at him. I'm in charge now, so back off. I'll call you when we're done, and you can come back and flirt all you want. Wells Knight huffed and clanged his sword against EX's abdomen armor. They didn't even flinch, only smiling and looking between the knights. What, you don't want to hang out with me? Asked Hell's Knight, lifting his sword and dragging it against the barrier. It didn't pass through, but it did look cool. I have to get my sibling back first. Your twin, huh? As you say, as you say. Hell straightened his back and sheathed his sword. It wasn't that long until his figure got hidden by the trees in the distance behind the barrier. When he was nowhere in sight, EX turned to look at Wells Knight. He slowly sheathed his own sword and relaxed. Let's get back to the continent, he said, and turned away from the barrier. You certain he won't come back? EX turned on their comm. He will. He will come back, just not today. You saw his face, didn't you? He listens to you because you are friends. He won't bother you. Friends. Wells Knight thought Hells and them were friends. And this thought didn't even make EX all that uncomfortable. How strange. Next, Evil X needed to find Zedaf. He was the only scientist remaining on the server, and another person who EX was not so scared to call a friend. Maybe. It was a bit harder than locating Wells, because Zedaf wasn't at his base. By messaging other hermits, they were not able to locate him and decided to just teleport and hope they won't get stuck in this new experiment. After teleportation, they found themselves in a dark room. The first thing they saw was a bloody cloth with a pile of bones on it. An alarming sight. Not an unusual one, though. With Zedoff, you could expect worse. And then EX was turning, catching a view of the room. Behind them stood Zedoff himself, smiling with a bloody scalpel in his hand. On the table below, the slime hermit was resting with a relaxed face. Jevin, with his new color EX gave him after their encounter in the woods before. Hi? Said EX, looking at both hermits in confusion. Jevin opened his pseudo eyes and sighed. We're kinda busy here. I'm on my bones appointment, don't you see? It's kinda rude to just barge in. Zedoff nodded and said, I'm sure EXE has a good reason. Yeah, I do, actually. People went missing. EX took a step back from Zedoff in his bloodied instruments, in fear that blood would stain their armor. Zedoff gave them a kind smile and placed his instruments on the table. Then he said, We know, but Jevin really needs his bone replaced, and I know that you will take care of the server. You will, right? EX nodded, but then asked, Where did these bones come from anyway? Slimes don't have blood, right? Skeletons too? Ah! Zedoff turned to look at the pile of bones on the cloth. These? He walked around the table, picking up the bloodied scalpel and getting back to stuffing Jevin with bones. The later laid with comfort on the table, eyeing EX with suspicion, as much eyeing as he could muster with his pseudo eyes. EX wasn't even sure what part of their body slimes used to see or sense. Whatever, their anatomy wasn't clear. Meanwhile, Zedoff filled one of Jevin's legs with bones and went to pick up more bones from a pile. He kneeled, picking out one of the smaller ones. It was to our luck that Cleo left her spare bodies to us. I'm almost sure she wouldn't mind Jevin borrowing them. And TFC too. I replaced one of his leg bones a bit ago. It wasn't performing too well. I've been told TFC is taking it easy today. The old guy always made Evil X feel vulnerable. He wasn't intimidating or annoying like others, but his presence rubbed EX the wrong way. I wouldn't know. He wasn't awake yet when I performed the surgery. What? EX hesitated for a moment. What? The best surgery is the one the patient doesn't have to worry about, said Zedoff, and stood up, going to work on Jevin's fingers next. Right, then. Can you guys chat after we're done? Complained Jevin. He then looked up at EX. You're too tall for comfort. After that, EX was kicked out to wait in the room with sheep along the wall. It wasn't a long wait. Both Jevin and Zedoff came out to them soon enough. Jevin left to go talk with others, while Zedoff approached EX in the most casual way with his typical charming smile. He was wearing a fresh, clean coat, but he still smelled of blood. What startled EX more was that Zedoff opened his arms, inviting to hug. For a moment, Evil X hesitated whether to hug him or not. They wanted a little, but at the same time it was difficult to think about. To think about being in someone's arms. And they agreed. They lowered themselves and let Zedoff wrap his arms around them. So, are you planning something? Asked Zedoff as he patted them on the back. I don't know where to start, admitted EX. Wells Knight told me to check the code, but I have no clue where to start. Oh, if it's code, then you're better off asking Joe. I saw him around TFC space, maybe an hour and a half ago. Yeek stared at him for a moment, then let go of Zed off to look at their comm. Swiping through menus, they reached the active member list. Joe was here. And Joe was among the names of those who went missing. And EX realized, sadly, that their potato-induced headache was growing strong again. And that is the end of Chapter 9.